Thank you, Dr. Hornaday. Good morning to all of you. The thing that impresses you about Dr. Hornaday is his graciousness, and another quality which I'm going to talk about later. It is, of course, a distinct privilege to be a guest speaker in this distinguished pulpit and before this truly distinguished congregation. I know from what I've heard and read, and I would know if I hadn't heard it and read it, that spiritual experiences take place here every Sunday, or this would not be. The fact that you come here in such large numbers every Sunday, again and again and again, means just that something happens here. Under the inspiration and guidance and teaching of this great minister, Dr. Hornaday. And I have to think, too, of Ernest Holmes as I stand here. We never, through the years of his existence on earth, when either of us was in the other city, failed to have a conference and a visit. And I pay tribute to him. And in talking to you this morning about the spiritual law of success, which many of you know, and which my words will serve only to remind you of, perhaps, but that's good. We learn by repetition. In speaking of that law, I speak of spiritual experience. I think that's what we're here for, to experience not only the dimensions of bodily, biological life, but to experience the reaches of that other life which attends us. As the poet says, man is one world and hath another to attend him. And that other world, the world of thought, of spirit, of consciousness, of intercommunication between minds telepathically, or as we call it today by ESP, extrasensory perception. That world wherein we nourish or reinvest ourselves with new resources is the thing that we're trying to experience. Man has always, through prayer and religious pursuits, tried to augment his own personal life with some extra life from out of the invisible. And when he touches it, that other side of life, and experiences it, that makes all the difference in the world. Then he's not the same anymore. And in talking about that this morning, I'd like to divide it into 3 sections, 3 steps, 3 parts, and call the first the necessity of right attitudes, which is more or less self-evident to all of us. And the second one, the necessity of insights to sustain those attitudes, because one may take the right attitude but not be able to hold it. One may get up in the morning and plan to be loving and kind and get along well with everybody, and by 10 o'clock he might be in a tizzy. And then he has a falling out with his secretary or his boss or the fellow next to him at the desk or the bench. I used to say, if you get up out of the wrong side of the bed, which is a figurative way of saying if you get up with a grouch, the wrong attitude, you're bound to have a fight before 10 o'clock, unless you change that attitude. The attitude means the way we face. How do we face this situation? What is our attitude toward it? P.P. Quimby, the ancient, well, not ancient, but a medical healer in the last century, 150 years would be considered ancient for a piece of furniture. You can bring it in custom free. But for a man, no. But 150 years, bearing on 200, I guess. Quimby up in Maine, who made many of the initial discoveries in our field, was in touch with this other side of the world all the time. He lived in 2 places at the same time, which gave him his great skill in healing. One time a woman came to him at the urging of her friends mostly, but she really didn't believe in him. In fact, she looked down on him. He used to say, people send for me and the undertaker at the same time. He was a last resort, and he was the other side of the tracks. He wasn't among the respected therapists. So this woman came, and he sat down, as was his custom, and was silent so that he might feel the woman, because he could take upon himself the feelings of other people and know exactly what you thought, where you felt the hurt, and then tell you about it and trace it back to its source. And so I've always called him the first psychoanalyst, the real, true psychoanalyst, because he didn't ask you to tell him, he told you. Now, you know, scientists are working on this mechanically and electronically to develop machines so that we will be able to know each other's thoughts. Doesn't that put a tremor through you? But there's a happy side to that. If the time comes when science will enable us to read each other's thoughts without this psychic development, then we'll all have to be completely honest, won't we? But there are people who dwell in that state now, and they know. And Quimby knew. So he sat down with the woman in silence, and after a while he got up, took his chair, turned it around, and sat down with his back toward her, and then he said, "Madam, this is the way you feel about me. I see no need of our further talk." That was her attitude toward him, and as you believe, so it shall be done unto you. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. There's no point in relying upon the surface thought when the subconscious thought is different. So I repeat, the necessity of right attitudes, the necessity of insights to sustain those attitudes, and the third one would be the necessity of goodwill or geniality. What Dr. Hornaday has in abundant measure. That's what I mean. I'll use him as a good illustration. We usually call it love, but love has so many connotations. Just call it good feeling. Because all the knowledge in the world, all the learning in the world, all the experience in the world, without geniality, will accomplish nothing. We know why people fail in this world from studies innumerable and surveys also without number. There are two main reasons. One, they expect to fail. Though they don't know it, many of them, they expect to fail. And the second reason, and I think it's by far the greater reason, for failure. And when I talk about success, let me say this, I don't mean just business success, I mean success in living as a person. That would include health and love and companionship and all the problems. The second great reason then is the lack of geniality. We find that people are consumed with rage or anger, and this destroys the whole pot. You can have all the degrees in the world, you can have all the talent in the world, but if you can't move and think in an ambience of good feeling, it'll fail. Paul told us that a long time ago. He said, though I have all knowledge, though I have the gift of healing and prophecy, but lack charity or love, I'm only a tinkling cymbal. That's all. And if you look around you and ask yourself some of these questions, you'll discover that many otherwise capable people fail just because this geniality is lacking. Again, Paul says, faith worketh by love. You have faith, but you're mad, won't work. You have great faith, confidence in this spiritual law of success, but you can't get along with people. You rub them the wrong way. You're envious, perhaps, or you get angry too quickly and blow your stack. Nothing works. So all the other gifts work best in this atmosphere or environment of good feeling. I like to call it good feeling to get it out of that Hollywood context of love, or to get it up above the belt, so to speak, out of the biological element of love. Now then, if these three categories I'm speaking about of thinking are established, right attitudes, which would be expectancy, hopefulness, faith, cheerfulness, determination, application, industry. These are the elements of success, aren't they? An old friend of mine used to say, he was chairman of the board of two great corporations at the time, a great business success. He used to say, if you concentrate, you'll be accurate. If you're accurate, you'll be successful. It's as simple as that. But a lot of us don't concentrate, and therefore we're not accurate. And that is rampant in the world today, isn't it? Inaccuracy, it's in every store, in every office. Mistakes. So if these are well established, then the mind becomes a sort of a magnet and transmits an unseen energy which has attractive capacities, just like a magnet. And the kind of thought with which you invest your thinking becomes the nature of the magnet, and therefore attracts that which is like it. Years ago, when I was a young lad in Spokane, Washington, and getting interested in this teaching, I knew a man who made pickles. He made all kinds of pickle products. And just before the Depression, he had several salesmen on his staff, and he had a thriving business. Then came the Depression. He had to let the salesmen go. And it was nip and tuck for him to make sales trips into the country and also run the business. He had as a secretary a little lady in our church, and she kept talking metaphysics to him. She says, you know, you could save yourself a lot of work and a lot of struggle and a lot of worry if you just use metaphysics and treat and think about this business. He'd have none of it. That was nonsense. She kept at him, and things got so bad that he began to listen. You know, that's when you do listen. When you get enough hell, you look for heaven. So he'd had it up to here. And he said, you mean to tell me that I can metaphysic up to Missoula and sell pickles? Or that I can metaphysic down to La Grande and sell pickles? She said, I mean just that. Well, when you've had it up to here, you're meek, you're teachable, you're amenable, and you'll listen. That's what Jesus meant, I think, when he said, blessed are the meek. They shall inherit the earth. The cynic says, yeah, 6 feet of it. But all he meant was the meek, not those who are a doormat for others to walk over, but those who are teachable, amenable, who will listen to any crazy idea in the hope that it may be helpful, who will entertain it. And so he was at that stage. He was meek enough to listen. So he sat down in his office and he metaphysicked, as he called it. And he went up to Missoula and he sold pickles psychically. And he went down to La Grande and he sold pickles psychically. He had only the instruction that his secretary had given him, but it was enough. Or perhaps he had what's called beginner's luck. When you first come into it, you have a lot of luck, don't you? Then it gets harder till you get over a certain hump, and then it gets easier again when you get second wind. Well, that was about the middle of the week, I should say Wednesday or Thursday. And on Monday morning, there came in the mail from Missoula an order larger than he had ever sold when he went up there physically. And 3 days later, another order came from La Grande area, sizable order also, and he was hooked. He believed from then on. And he used to tell me, Ervin, if it hadn't been for metaphysics, I would have worn out the rug in my room, walking back and forth. Well, that man learned that there is a kind of a thought substance which goes forth from the mind, and that is built up by treatment, by thinking, by right attitudes, until the mind becomes like a strong electromagnet. Invested with a certain kind of thought substance, it goes out, and I might mix the illustrations and metaphors here, and similes, and say we're not only like a magnet, our minds are like radio receivers and transmitters, and we are transmitting and receiving at the same time. We are receiving from all others, and that's why it's so important to gather in a place like this on Sunday morning, under the instruction of a great mind, a spiritual mind, because you're in an atmosphere which is blessing. You're among others whose intents and purposes are all toward the same end, and you're receiving benefit from all sources. Then you go out into the world again, tomorrow into the marketplace, where the strife and the struggle and the littleness will abound, but you have some reinforcements with which to stand it. So it becomes like an electromagnet, and that's why the attitudes are so important. And the next step would be to sustain those attitudes, wouldn't it? I used to say a person can go into a great cathedral on Sunday morning or any time and sit down and feel the ambience of the place, the atmosphere. I used to tell people who came to Philharmonic Hall, think what you're feeling here. The great, especially in Carnegie Hall, where we were before that, which is historic. Think of the vibrations in this place. The great musicians who walked here and played here. They've left their thought atmosphere here. Someday we shall pick it up mechanically and electronically. But right now we have to pick it up with our own unschooled instruments, but it's here. We're in this atmosphere. And when we first went to Philharmonic Hall, I wrote a little piece called The Art of Living, because it's the greatest art of all. And we went to a center for the performing arts, and I encouraged all of us to perform in the greatest art of all, the art of living. And when it comes down to it, the art of living is simply getting along with people and with dogs and cats and sticks and stones, isn't it? That's it. If you have this geniality, which is the third step, we're skipping number 2 a little bit yet, but we'll come back and hit him. This geniality, you can do almost anything and still be successful. I don't care what your talents are, they'll prosper. They may be small or they may be great, but if you have this geniality, this goodwill, your faith will be effective, your talents will prosper, and you'll be happy. You may not be president, but then who wants to be? Except a few politicians. You might want to be president of the company, but you might want just to sweep floors. What's the difference if you're happy? This same gentleman I spoke about, who said, if you concentrate, you'll be accurate, and if you're accurate, you'll be successful, said one time as he walked through the shop of this great printing plant and saw a young man sweeping the floors. And he was sweeping with a sort of a lackadaisical, don't care attitude. It's a menial job. Where'll it ever get me? And the president of the company went up to him and he said, Walter, do you want to be president of this company? Walter was startled. Well, sir, because if you do, you better sweep floors with some enthusiasm. And I'd like to see you be president, but you got to start where you are, sweeping floors with enthusiasm. I met Walter years later when he was the president of that company. And it was simply because this man, his name was General Ottman. He was general of the New York Guard in addition to his business enterprises. Because General Ottman programmed this young man and fired him and inspired him and injected into his magnet the qualities which would attract success. But now I want to emphasize number 2, that it's difficult to sustain the right attitudes often. We lose them when we go out into the marketplace, or somebody discourages us, or wet blankets us in our ideas, or frustration and long labor without results discourage us. And we lose our attitude. We don't keep it positive. How are you going to sustain it? Well, I have a number of ways, and we do in metaphysics generally. We say there's one power, only one power. And if there's one power, they're not two. And if there's one, they're not three. If there's one, there's not many. Now, what do we usually attribute our discouragement, our fear, our anxiety to, if not to people and conditions and things around us which trouble us? Take down the level of our mood, don't they? Yes, we believe that events and conditions are gods, even though we're told that they're not, that there's one power, and that that power is mind or consciousness or thought. Well, here's a way of saying it. An old German mystic put it this way. He said, God were no creator unless he also did create creators. Let that marinate just a little bit. God were no creator unless he also did create creators. That makes sense, doesn't it? How could it be otherwise? Now, what I'm trying to do is to box in your thought for a moment so that it can't get out of four little walls, so that the logical sense of the mind can't go anywhere but with the truth. And we will establish that concept, that God were no creator unless he also did create creators. If God is the Father, the progenitor, then that which he created or projected or generated, procreated, is also a creator, inheriting the nature of its Father, on its own level, in its own place, on its own scale. As God the Father hangs the stars in the heavens and moves them around silently, so God, the individual Father in you and me, creates circumstances in the individual world, and it's all one and the same, working on different scales or levels. Now, if you remember that when you get discouraged, that it's not my sister nor my brother, it's not my neighbor, it's not my employer, it's not my employee, it's not conditions, things, events, it's my thought that's governing this. Then, as Ernest Holmes would say, there's nothing to treat but yourself. Don't treat the condition, treat the attitude toward it. There's neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. There's no good or evil, but in my appraisal of the situation. Years ago, when I first went to New York on a visit, I wanted to see Father Divine, because he was riding high in those days, and people were going from all over the country to see him. So I went to Harlem, to the Marie Theresa Hotel on 125th Street, and when we got into the room, I telephoned Father Divine's mission on 115th Street and said, "What time does Father Divine speak?" And the little girl on the other end of the line said, "Father don't speak by the clock, he speaks to the Spirit." So I said, well, I came a long way to hear him. How could I hear him? She said, well, if you come between 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock, sometime during that time, you'll hear Father speak. And I did. The next day I went back, and they were having a big celebration because Father Divine's followers were all full of banners and ribbons and bunting. They were going to join the Memorial Day parade down Riverside Drive. And the entrance to the hall was so crowded with people, there was no human hope of getting in there. And I'd already given up. My attitude had changed. You see, something took my attitude away. The crowd. But a young girl came along with banners in her hands and obviously intent on performing some mission. And she looked at this crowd. "Oh my, I can't get through there," she said. Then quickly she corrected her thoughts. She said, "Thank you, Father." And she put her arms like the bow of a ship and went right down through the crowd. She changed her attitude toward the whole situation because she remembered her higher resources. She remembered that she wasn't just a poor little two-legged creature, subject to other two-legged creatures, that she was a divine being, that she opened out, as Ernest Holmes would say again, into the vastness of the infinite. And those were her resources. As soon as she remembered that, her attitude was there again, her spirit came again, and she succeeded. I knew of a salesman one time who never made more than $5,000 a year. This was in the 30s. But he was such a great guy. He was a good salesman. He knew his product. He worked industriously. And his sales manager said, "This guy needs a better break." So they gave him a nice territory, which was productive of $25,000 a year, easily. He still made $5,000. Because his consciousness, his attitude was such that he could only do that, no matter what environment you put him in. His consciousness arranged to get him sick for 3 months. So even in the lush territory, he couldn't make more than $5,000. That was his measure of himself. Then there are others who can't make it because they allow their hearts to burn up with rage or anger. And that destroys whatever talents and industry they have, you see, or the effects of their industry. So these two steps that I've mentioned, right attitude and how to sustain it, then depend upon this geniality, this love. Faith worketh by love. Without this love, the rest don't work. But with this, you can go anywhere. And to sustain these attitudes and get into this love, as Dr. Hayes has read from the 82nd Psalm, take care of the poor and the fatherless and deliver the needy. And I want to say just in closing that means to me this: the poor and the needy and the fatherless are nowhere so plentiful as in you. Those poor and sniveling thoughts which you do not nourish, those fatherless children of the mind which are ready to grow up and populate your world with health and happiness, and you ignore them. The needy who are reaching out their hands and their mouths for nourishment in the form of good thought, and you ignore them. Deliver the needy and the poor from the hand of the wicked, from your negative thoughts. And when you're down and low and discouraged, remember, God were no creator unless He also did create creators. Your spirit will come again, and you won't be mad at nobody. You'll be like the man who won the lottery, and he won a lot. He got all the checks cashed into money, currency, and he sat in the center of his living room and he kept throwing it up. He said, "Boy, I don't hate nobody." When you've got it made, you don't hate. When you're right in yourself, you don't feel mad. When everything's smooth in here and the juices and the currents are flowing in love, there is nothing in the world that can hurt you, and everything you touch succeeds. I wish to be still and commit these words to the success and the glory of each individual here. Remove the dross, and let that which is chaff fall away, but let that which is gold invest itself in your magnet and attract its own. So be it. Last evening I opened some mail which was brought me from New York, and in it was a little book published by the Science of Mind Publications, Willis Kinnear editor, The Miracle of Anne. And I was extremely thrilled to read The Miracle of Anne and all that this church had to do with the miraculous restoration of a severed arm. And I thought, if just one thing like that occurred, one experience, all that you do here would be worthwhile. But many things like that happen here over the years, I'm sure. And the reason this great congregation gathers here, and I understand I'm only seeing a part of it, there's another vast part of it which sees me, but which I don't see. They see me through the miracle of closed-circuit television. And the reason they gather here every Sunday, I'm sure, is because of experiences like the miracle of Anne. And that's what it's all about, spiritual experience. The term usually suggests something ethereal and otherworldly, doesn't it? Spiritual experience. But by spiritual experience, I mean some contact with the world that's all around us, not the physical world, not just the biological, circumstantial world, but in the words of the poet, man is one world and hath another to attend him. And we know there's something more to us than is contained between our hat and our boots, don't we? We know from on various occasions and for various reasons that there's a world all about us here, filled with presences, filled with wisdom and intelligences, and doing things, and stimulating this world from behind. And when we have a contact with that, our resources are strengthened, and we're nourished and sustained. That's what I mean by spiritual experience. A healing, a renewal of courage, a strengthening of resolution, and the knowledge that there's something infinite and wise and loving in us and through us and behind us. That's spiritual experience. So that's what I mean when I come to the subject of the spiritual law of success. I don't mean just dollars and cents. I don't mean just promotion and pay. I mean successful living, and all that that may entail and include. Success as a person, success as a spouse, success as an employer or an employee, enough money to satisfy your needs and perhaps your ego. Everybody needs a little ego success, doesn't he? People say to me, "Don't you miss New York and that wonderful congregation in Philharmonic Hall?" Yes, every once in a while I do. I miss the people, mainly. But I don't miss, what shall I say, the glory of it. I wondered if I would, 1972 was a critical year for me, because at the end of that year I sang the swan song there. And I said to myself often now, especially when I stood at the door and greeted people, and you know what a minister gets at the door. Oh, you're the greatest, you're this and that was the greatest. And sometimes you begin to believe it. And that's a great danger. Yes, you begin to believe your own publicity, as they say. And you have to keep the balance. But it is flattering to the ego, it is satisfying to the soul to have so many wonderful people and to feel their love. And I wondered if I'd miss that. Well, I miss their love, but I don't miss the ego satisfaction, I'm glad and happy to say. I've had enough of that to sustain me, and I'm grateful for that. But everybody needs it. You need a little ego satisfaction to set you up. So if that's in your problem of being a success, claim it. And I want to divide the rest of my remarks into three parts, really, because I see it that way, or at least that's the way I saw it yesterday when I made some notes on it. The first time I did it, I didn't do it this way. The next time I do it, I may do it another way. But as I see it this morning, the spiritual law of success is divisible into three parts. And the first is the necessity of having a right attitude or a number of right attitudes towards success. And we know for 1,000 reasons that attitude is all important. Attitude means the way I face. Not just the way I face you physically, but the way I face you metaphysically, psychologically. One may have conscious attitudes. He may smile and be generous and praiseful, but underneath he may be just the opposite. Except horses and dogs and cats and all animals, they're honest. It's only human beings who dissemble. But right attitude is important. The mastermind says if a man strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And when we metaphysicians regard that statement, we regard it as the ultimate in wisdom, because it means to us, change your attitude. You see, physically it simply means that if somebody hits you here, you better turn around. You're going in the wrong direction. And it means your attitude, but it means your psychological attitude. If you've been thrust back, hurt, frustrated, stopped, stymied, you better turn the other cheek. The right cheek always means the outermost man. The result. You see, we're mostly right-handed, aren't we? Some of us are ambidextrous, some of us are left-handed, but the average is right-handed. So the right hand is the most apparent. We can all see what you do, but we can't all see what you think. That's the secret place of the Most High. So if your right hand is not making it, it is obvious that you must turn your left, change your thinking, the subjective part, turn it around, change your attitude. If you're not getting along with your dog or your cat, obviously it's something in you that he doesn't like. And if you change the attitude, they respond completely. Dr. Bill was telling us an interesting story about this wonderful new flag out here. It's a glory, isn't it? It's really a glory. I watched it yesterday. When they were raising it, they took the Pledge of Allegiance and the flag floated beautifully in the breeze, and then he had a prayer. And as he went into the prayer, the flag drooped. The wind died down, as if in response. I believe that. My wife Elva and I were once down at City Hall in New York, just after the war, when Admiral Nimitz was received in honor by a grateful country. And Mayor LaGuardia was then alive, one of the greatest, most colorful characters who ever lived. We loved him. At least I did. There were a few who hated him, but he was an honest man, He was at his best that day. The stage was built like the prow of a battleship, and they piped the admiral up onto the deck, and it was cloudy and overcast and threatening, and LaGuardia, with the wind blowing his forelock, looked up and he said, "Come on out, son." And he barely finished saying it when the sun came out. The clouds parted. He had the same kind of charismatic power as Dr. Bill with the flag. Well, a man has power with the elements because our minds are collections of thought substance. That's what a mind is. Who's ever seen his mind? Have you? We say my mind. Where is it? You don't see mind. We say my, we say your. That denotes possession, but nobody's ever seen the mind. You see the effects, that's all. It's like spirit. It's forerunner. Spirit, then mind, then body. That's what we're made of. Spirit is mind before it's been conceptualized. When it's conceptualized, then it's here in the center. And then when it takes form, we call it body, or circumstance, or form. But nobody sees the mind. He uses it. He knows about it. But the mind is a collection of facts. Quimby used to say that every child that's born is a blank piece of paper on which everybody who comes along scribbles. And that's what makes our personality. So if we're fortunate to have had the right scribblers, we're better off. But if too many oddballs and screwballs have scribbled on us, then that's why we're in the mess that we are. And we have to erase or rewrite. But the mind is a collection then of thought substances. And these thought substances give the tone and tenor to the mind. Whatever we've thought about, dwelt upon, forms the color and the tone. What I like to think of as the magnetism of the mind, because the mind is like a magnet. The thought substances that have been put in there have an attractive power and attract their like, just as a magnet does. The mind is also like a radio transmitter and receiver, all at the same time. It receives from other people, it transmits. That's why you have a spiritual experience here on Sunday mornings. You come into an ambience, into an atmosphere. All your intents and purposes are sound. Well, if not sound, at least they're cordial. Because I'm thinking now, I used to tell it from my platform, I hope it will be all right, well received here, of the man with evil intentions who went to church. It's not always that we have honorable people in church, but they're usually better off for having been there. This man shook hands with the rector of the church as he left that morning and thanked him. He received a lot of help, he said. And the rector was interested and wanted to know how he received help. And the man said, well, when I came here this morning, I didn't come for spiritual reasons. I came to steal a hat. But he says, when you got to the commandment on adultery, I remembered where I left mine. Well, at least the service did help him to remember. But here in this great place, you are in an atmosphere which is helping you. The law of blessing is over this place. Not only from the clergy who govern this place and all the staff, and they're wonderful, I tell you, but from all of you who gather and wish everybody else well when you sit here and feel the presence of God. That's magnetism, that's receiving and transmitting. Now, we're always doing that, and the quality of the thought that we transmit determines our success in life. Because it's calling reinforcements either for good or for evil. An old piece of writing whose author I cannot remember always inspires me because it goes something like this in paraphrase. Be vigilant, be industrious, keep on going in your thought, positively and constructively, no matter how hard the road. Keep on going in the right, no matter how you're bleeding, how you're struggling, because some fine morning you will crest the hill, and the trumpets will be blowing, and the flags will be waving, and reinforcements will be marching to meet you. It's in the imagery of the military, but it means the spiritual experience of other forces and other resources taking over. So right attitudes are important. Oftentimes we can't sustain them, though, can we? That's my second point, how to sustain them. That requires insight. Insights, intellectual insights, to sustain the right attitude. Sometimes we can't sustain them because we're contrary with ourselves. There's a tug of war going on. The conscious mind wants to go this way, but the subconscious says this way. And in spite of ourselves, we fail. Because a lot of people are crisis seekers. They don't know it. They expect to fail. They expect to be hurt. In every human encounter and relationship, they expect to come off second best or odd man out. Two men were walking in the park. You've heard this, some of you, but it'll illustrate again. Walking in a little city park, and a bird flew over and dropped something on one man's shoulder, and he was the sad sack of the two. So true to his nature, his human nature, he said, you see, for others they sing. Do you know why we laugh at that? Because there's a sad sack in every one of us. And there are times when each of us has felt like that. There's no use. I wasn't made to succeed. I was made to fail. To other men, yes, but not to me. Or perhaps your sins weigh too heavily on you. What you think of as your sins, and you haven't attained forgiveness yet. You haven't listened to the graciousness and the lovingness of Dr. Bill long enough to feel that warmth that he exudes so lavishly. To feel that you're at home in the universe, and that it is a friendly universe. That friendly presences are all around. The other ones are here too, but the first outnumber them. I like the old rural preacher's prayer, "Oh Lord, help me to know that you ain't going to let nothing happen to me which you and me together can't handle." Help me to know that. Help me to let down in it. And there are a lot of people who are tentative with life, never really letting their weight down and saying, this is friendly, this is nice, it's buoyant, I won't sink. And that's what we want to come to correct the quarrels inside of ourselves and find out why we're crisis seekers, why we don't expect better things, why if we attempt to with the conscious mind, something says you won't get it. You may pray, you may try to be good, and you may affirm, you may treat, but it won't happen to you because you see you're not worthy of it. Or something you did long ago will prevent it. And we want to scotch that and correct it. So my second point is how to sustain those insights. We know from surveys and studies why people fail. There are two main reasons. The first one is they expect to fail. We know this. The evidence for this is overwhelming. Everywhere from Yale University to Stanford, they've made studies on this. And they know why people fail. Knowing why don't we change them? It's like psychosomatic medicine, which came after metaphysics, and says essentially that 90% of our troubles, it used to be 50, 60, 70, 80, now it's 90, some say 100, are due to wrong emotions. All right, we know that much. Psychosomatic medicine always stops a little short, as I see it. It never tells us how to correct those emotions. And that's the province of our study. That's the charm of it. It tells us how to correct the bad emotions and institute the good ones through insights. And one insight that we teach in science of mind, metaphysics, is that there's only one power. One creative power that makes all things. Common sense teaches this. Logic teaches it. If there were two executives in this universe, we wouldn't have order, would we? Well, you say they agree. Well, then that's one. There can't be two bosses in any operation. There has to be one to set the policy. And he has to know what the policy is. So logic teaches there has to be one creator, one God, And the Bible reiterates and emphasizes and harps on the fact that, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." Not two, one. Not three, one. Not many, one. Now, if we find that one in any area of our lives, we found it, haven't we? Well, have you ever cured a headache with your thought? Have you ever changed your life at all by changing your thought? Well, then you've had a spiritual experience. Have you ever witnessed how much difference a change of thought makes in your life? Then you've found the one. An old German mystic puts it this way. He said, "God were no creator unless he also did create creators." That means I'm a creator where I am. On my own, in my world. I don't run the stars. I don't have infinite knowledge. That's not my business. I don't run your affairs. I don't know enough. But in my own niche, on my own scale, in my world, I am God to my world. That's exactly what God said to Moses when his knees shook and his intestines quivered. When God commissioned him to do a job, God said to him, "Behold, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh." If Pharaoh represents the whole outside world, this phenomenal world which gets on our nerves so often, which thwarts us, we think. If Pharaoh represents that, and I have made you a god to Pharaoh, then fear him no more. And don't all our fears, our wrong emotions, our wrong thoughts come from the idea that events and conditions are the matter? We attribute godhood to them, causation to them, power to them. We say it's the circumstance. And long ago I coined a kind of a phrase to describe that when we excuse our failures or our difficulties by pointing the finger at something else or somebody else. I call it the philosophy of Willie pushed me. Because how did you happen to fall down? Willie pushed me. Or the little girl who ran to her mother crying and said, "Johnny broke my doll." How did he break it? I hit him over the head with it. And you see, for one who is studying the science of mind or metaphysics or the truth teaching, these concepts are verboten from now on. If God is a creator, he created only creators. We are creators then. In what does our creativity consist? In our attitudes, our thoughts. Every thought we think is a prayer, for good or for bad. Every thought we think is creative, not because it's my thought or your thought, but because it's thought. It has that power. Now, if we can sustain our attitude by this thinking, and if we can't at first, let's keep doing it by repetition until the mind accepts it. Box the mind in like this and say, "Is this logic?" Yes. Then where are you going to go to deny it? How can you find an exception to this? "I am God and there is none else. My glory I will not give to another. Yea, I know no other." Challenge your mind to find another. And the moment you point the finger at some circumstance, condition, or historical fact, or biological fact, you will have to, in the next breath, deny it if you think this thought. And now that should bring us to the third step, which I call, good feeling, geniality, love, charity, good feeling. Because none of the aforementioned will work unless you have this. We know this too from statistical surveys and studies, innumerable, that the reason so many people fail is because they're torn up with rage. I recall, though I can't recall her name, a great doctor you had out here in charge of Los Angeles County hospitals at one time, a woman. And she laid it down out of her vast experience with all the mental patients in this vast cosmopolitan area, that the one emotion that was behind most of their dementia was jealousy. Well, Clement of Rome, nearly 2,000 years ago, said, "Envy, by which death first entered the world." Envy. What burns us up so much, takes our energy, our force, as rage or envy, or hate, or anger? I know a man who spent most of his life getting angry. Angry at anything and everything, including his wife, of course, and family. And only in the last 3 years has he learned at all to overcome it. And he said to me with tears in his eyes, his business is prospering now as it never prospered before. Suddenly, he's always wanted to be prosperous, but never could afford it. And that was adding an extra burden to him. And now, suddenly, he can't handle the business that's coming to him. And he said, I finally discovered. I know it was my anger that defeated me. Well, how can you be angry anymore now if you have this insight that there's only one power? Then it's not what makes you angry that is the power. Then why be angry? If you think it's that guy who has pestered you all your life and hounded you, it's not. It was your thought about him. So I laid down a rule. Can I plug my book? All I said in 12 chapters was one thing over and over again. Over and over, I said the same thing. Because I know we learn by repetition. But then I don't know any other way to say it than to say the same thing over and over again. I always say I have only one subject. I say the same thing a little bit differently each time. But I said, it's not what happens to you, but it's what you think of what happens to you that makes the difference between misery or happiness. Now you test that out. We suffer from our opinions and our judgments, not from facts and people and circumstances. If you say, oh, that makes me sick, it's not the truth. That didn't make you sick. You made yourself sick by thinking about that. So Marcus Aurelius said, let your opinion lie still. You try that as a working principle sometime. When you see something you don't like, or you smell something you don't like, or you taste something you don't like, or somebody says something you don't like, stop and make no judgment. Say, none of these things moves me. My life is governed by my regard, by my thought about God and creativity, not by these things. These have nothing to do with me. If you let your opinion lie still, all of a sudden, the hurt passes. You're not mad, you go straight ahead. I knew an old gentleman once when he was 83, and he was the utmost of calm and serenity. Though in his youth he'd been this other kind, full of hate and rage and anger and fight. And they used to say something about insults, and he'd say, well, by George, you can't insult me, he'd say. I don't know what an insult is. He'd grown above all insults. So any barbs thrown at him just fell off. He was above that. Well, you see, if you work the principle correctly, that you're a creator divinely endowed with all that it takes to win in this world, and there is nothing malign in this world anywhere. There is no malign agency anywhere. Only benign things. Apprehended or misapprehended become malign through our thought, but in themselves they're nothing. There is neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. If we hold to this principle, you see, we don't respond in anger, envy, rage. We put ugly emotions to sleep, the wild animals of Isaiah, which rend and tear. That's what they are, these emotions. And he says, then the lion and the lamb shall lie down together, and the leopard eat straw with the ox, and a little child shall lead them. What little child? The new growth in you and me. That's the little child. He'll lead. He'll lead us like a strong man. Lead us with more force and energy and wisdom and might than any general who ever lived. But he's a little child, the new growth in ourselves. We all have to be little children again. You see, commonly we say man is a man once and a child twice. Because usually when we get old, we get childish. But spiritually, we hope to be childlike. All the great masters, as they get older, become childlike. And there's a vast difference between childlikeness and childishness. Childish, you're just dying slowly. Nicholas Murray Butler used to say the average man's epitaph ought to read, died at 30, buried at 60. And the poet, Carl Sandburg, said, beware of the little death. Beware of the little death. The little deaths are these corrosive emotions and attitudes. Wrong attitudes. Certainly rage is death, isn't it? Anger is death. Envy is death. It's taking away something from us. Opening the petcocks and letting the precious energies of life drain away into nothingness, creating only disturbance. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Heal it, overcome it. He that sows the wind shall inherit the whirlwind. And so we come to this place then where we're genial, where our attitudes are sustained by insights and we feel loving. Now, whatever our talents are, they work. They may be small, they may be great, but they'll satisfy us. They'll remunerate us. They'll give us satisfaction in life, and that's all that each of us is seeking for, isn't it? Just satisfaction, just to be happy, to be right. When we're right inside, we don't hate, we don't spend time in anger or jealousy or envy or any of those things. We're right inside, therefore we're right with every person and with every stick and stone, every creature, and with the universe itself. I'm still as I commit these words to the truth in you, to the strength in you, the beauty and the joy, and to the success of everyone here. Amen.